So, hello everyone, and welcome to Green Justice. I'm here with Paula Hirschman and Aramis, who is our special guest today. Aramis is a student in criminology, approaching the end of her BA, and actually was a research assistant working with Paula, Greg, and I on this podcast when we first got it going. So she was doing all kinds of research, and has also been a student in Paula's Green Criminology class. So that's going to be the focus today. We are delighted that Aramis can be here with us. And do you want to just say hi and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. Like Mark said, um, I'm in my fifth and final year of CRIM, and I took Green CRIM with Paula, which I really enjoyed. And I'm just looking forward to this conversation.
Excellent. Yeah, and just so our listeners know, I guess some of the background, Paula, Greg, and I developed this class 3-9-11. So it's a third year class that focuses entirely on green criminology. Paula taught it the first time. Well, I guess Greg really taught it the first time as a special topics class. So that was kind of a one-off, I think, back in 2018. And then when we developed it as a green criminology class that's offered more regularly, Paula taught it this time last year when it was first offered, and I'm teaching it in the summer.
That's right. Yeah, I remember us developing this course. But yeah, in theory, Greg already taught it as a special topics, and then kind of we're left to our own devices now. Hopefully there were some good elements of Green Crim that we can talk about. I know there were some highlights for myself as an instructor and seeing everything that was done in the course. So yeah.
So where did you first hear about Green Crim? Were you introduced to it in other classes that you took at KPU, or where did you first hear about it?
Yeah, actually, I was introduced to Green Crim through critical criminology with Paula. We had a week where we went over like environmental issues and environmental justice, and it really resonated with me, and I found it super interesting. And then Paula announced to us in that class that she was going to be teaching Green Crim. And yeah, I decided to apply for it.
Great.
Yeah.
Had you been interested in nature or the outdoors or environmental issues before then?
Yeah, I would say so. As a child, I loved going to parks and just looking at the insects and animals and everything there. That was really fascinating to me. So I've always loved nature. And then in high school, I was very interested in the vegan community and their message of like anti-animal cruelty and environmental protection. So I was vegan myself for a little bit before I couldn't continue because of health issues. But that's not to say that you can't do that the diet isn't healthy. It just didn't really work for me. But yeah, I've always plants and animals and the environment have had a special place in my heart, I would say.
And then before you were introduced to it in Paula's critical criminology class, like the fact that criminology has a whole subfield that engages with these topics sounds like that was something that was kind of like new to you that you just found out about.
Yeah, exactly. And I really like that green criminology looks beyond like the more traditional forms of criminality. That's what kind of drew me to it because I am interested in critical criminology. It's kind of like a subdiscipline, I would say, of critical crim. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I think that's the way. I mean, Paula, how do you think about it? I think about Green Crim as like sort of falling under the umbrella or sharing a lot of the same aims with critical crim. Is that how you think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I know that you can take it kind of from, well, we talked about this in the course too, right? Like so many different perspectives. Green criminology isn't like this singular entity. But I guess, yeah, particularly the way that I like teaching it, takes on that kind of, falls under that umbrella term of critical criminology because you're thinking about it, um, as harm, right? As a sort of harm, as opposed to strictly thinking about the concept of crime. So I think that's like kind of the foundational element, right? And definitely from that critical approach, you're looking at the more, structural and systemic issues that lead to these sorts of harms. So it falls nicely under that umbrella. But you can definitely, I mean, there's different, as we, you can talk about different forms of green criminology and what that actually means. I think we've tried to have that conversation a couple times, Mark, where it's like trying to define what exactly is green criminology, because it is so kind of, far reaching, and like theoretically there's so many different orientations, and yeah, there's just so much to do with it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's like a lot of different substantive topics that people engage
Mm,
with it.
yeah.
When you say harm, when you talk about harm, can you give an example and like talk a little bit more about that? Right.
Yes. Well, and I mean, I teach this, I think, across all of my criminology courses too. So it's not just within green criminology or even critical criminology. Although I like introducing it like in the intro to crim or intro to criminal justice, right? Because when we talk about criminology, usually the students are thinking about, crime. What is it embedded within the criminal code? And that is kind of the disciplinary foundation of criminology, right? That's what we think of it traditionally. But I try and push past that within like all of my courses, really, and try and focus not only what behaviors are criminalized, but a lot of the behaviors that are not, right? And we can think about particularly environmental issues, not just as like, criminalized behaviors, but also those that are regulated, and thinking more broadly about harms or actions that we engage in as individuals, or larger corporations or states engage in, that are harmful but not criminalized, and really sometimes not even regulated, right? So it opens up the kind of, as Aramis was saying, like thinking about the traditional notion of criminology. It just goes so far beyond that. And I think that's kind of what happened with the course. We talked a lot about, the whole second half of the course was talking about just different substantive topics that could be included within green criminology, right? So we had guest lectures coming in too. I had someone from the SPCA who came in to talk about animal cruelty and legislation relating to that, and kind of investigations and things. And then we had the artist in residence come in, and we went out. We did an outdoor land-based activity to try and kind of connect with nature in a different way. So, and you might not think of that as like an issue relating to harm or a concept of crime or criminology traditionally. But if we think about it more broadly as our relationship to nature, and how we maybe have to think of it differently, kind of move away from an anthropocentric position and kind of situate
Yeah.
ourselves. Yeah. Well, yeah, you can speak to that for sure as a student, I guess. Change of mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. No, definitely the eco-philosophies resonated with me, moving past that anthropocentric bias and seeing ourselves as connected with the natural world, I think is really important. And it's not just an object that we have the right to exploit. We don't. And I think the worldview that we do is problematic. And it's kind of like socialized into us by how society's set up and everything. So,
That's really well said. Yeah, it's so hard to sometimes express these views succinctly, but yeah, I love how you phrased that, because I've been looking a little bit into this place-based teaching or education and land-based education, and so Paula and Aramis, so you guys spent time outside in green criminology. Is that right? So you went outdoors, and can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, on several occasions we did. I don't know if maybe you want to mention some of the highlights, what you enjoyed as a student. So there were a few times that we kind of went out. I think you might have missed the Stream Keepers event, but there was a few other
yeah,
instances too. Yeah.
I remember the time that um, we went, we did that tree activity. I'm not remembering who conducted it. Can you remind me, Paula?
Selena
Where?
Bone. Yeah. So our
Yeah,
artist in
Selena
residence
Bone.
at the
That
time.
was
Yeah.
really nice, because the activity was kind of like based on trusting one another and then feeling like that connection to the natural world around KPU, because we don't really have the chance to get out. And I loved just putting my hands on the trees, which was a part of it, was very therapeutic. And yeah, it was just nice to get out with
Yeah.
that activity. Yeah.
It's kind of like a different way of connecting to the issues that you guys were talking about before in terms of environmental harm and all the structural issues and the damage that's often caused just by like business as usual, right? But oftentimes the regulatory system doesn't really um, uh, criminalize that kind of harm, or it treats it through a regulatory regime, which is much more, um, I don't know. How would you say it, Paula? Is it lax?
Definitely a
Um,
lack. Yeah.
yeah, but yeah,
Insufficient to deal with the issue. Very insufficient to deal with the issue. Yeah.
right.
And I think that was like one of the takeaways from students too, thinking about that, right? And thinking about that normalization of disconnect between ourselves and nature, right? So Aramis mentioned like, going out, just the activity that we did was we basically were brought out, we paired up, one student had their eyes closed, and basically the other student had to guide them to a tree, and then the student who was had their eyes closed would touch the tree, try and connect with it, see kind of what it would feel, what it was like, and then they would go back and they'd have to identify the same tree when they opened their eyes,
Wow.
and it was kind of based on like this. The trust element was like the guiding the students as they were kind of blindfolded to the tree.
Right.
They had to use language to kind of define the terrain to help the student navigate to that tree. So it's interesting too, because we were encouraged not to use language that would really objectify the nature around us, right? So I actually also found that quite difficult because I would refer to it or, that, and really not using language that was, demonstrating that connection that we have. So I think it's, as Aramis was saying, it's very internalized, right? And it's based on the status quo, business as usual capitalist system that we live within. So, yeah.
Yeah,
For sure.
and it like it, embedded in our language, right? Like that's super
Yeah.
interesting to think about, like how um, the very like the English language positions humans in relation to nature, often as outside of and above sort of nature. So I feel like there's a lot of ways in which we can talk about nature in English that just reinforces that anthropocentric view that Aramis was mentioning earlier.
Hmm. Yeah, actually, and it was really nice because we had the webinar by Robin Walkimmerer during that week, like while our reading week, right? So a lot of the students actually like listened to the webinar and learned a little bit about that distinction and how problematic the English language is, but also that not all languages actually make that distinction. So I think some of those takeaways too was basically how we use language and in our reference to the natural world, and whether we're including ourselves within it, and or objectifying nature versus understanding it as living thing that is also connected to us.
So this is where we really get into some of the philosophy, I guess, that underpins green criminology.
Yeah.
But it's very, I mean, what I like about what this discussion that the two of you are having is it really is a different way of learning and a different way of engaging with the world around us. So it's not just about going outdoors, right? Because it's like, it's one thing to kind of like leave the classroom physically and go
Hmm.
physically into the outdoors. But then the other part of it, and in a way, the much more important part is what is the intention that you have once you're there, once you are outside of the four walls of the classroom. Um,
I
yeah.
think with the course that you're instructing in the summer, Mark, that it would be nice to maybe teach outside more, especially because the weather will be nice. So, because I did enjoy that, and I feel like we didn't really get enough of that.
Yeah, that was
Yes.
like a big drawback. Well, being taught during the spring term,
Spring,
January,
yeah.
February is
Yeah.
oftentimes inclement
I
weather.
tried. Yeah.
Yeah. And Paula, you also mentioned Cougar Creek and the stream keepers. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, actually, you already have plans to take the students on a similar walk, I think.
Well,
I
I think
actually
that,
piggybacked. I actually piggybacked off of David's class, and because he was already doing a walk with his students, they were going to talk about the watersheds. So I basically said, "Oh, that's a great opportunity," and so he invited us out as well,
so that would be
which is
David
great.
Sadoway and Doc.
Yes.
Cool.
See,
Yeah. So yeah, so like that. So hearing about that, like that's definitely when you say I have plans. Right now, it's more just like ideas. I still have to reach out to them, and but hopefully I can make that connection and set that up. Yeah. So the other thing that I wanted to ask both of you about was the action projects, right? Because
the
is the
action projects.
the
Yeah.
action projects? Paula, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so I can provide a brief overview of what they are, and then Aramis can tell us about her project that she did for that
For sure.
class, which was amazing. So actually, I do this in a lot of my classes because I do teach a lot of theory courses. So usually, what we do is for the final project, instead of having a written paper, I tell students take some sort of social issue that you're interested in, and in this case for green criminology, it would be an environmental issue. I say frame it within the context of, for example, a theory, or in this case, maybe an eco-philosophy. Do some research on the topic in terms of how the problem has been understood through this perspective or other perspectives, as well as some proposed solutions. And so they do kind of like an overall presentation on that. I've adopted your model, Mark, and I have them do poster presentations on it. But then the action component is that they have to find some sort of way of contributing in a very small way to addressing the solution, right? So thinking on like a very small scale, micro level, what can they do within their team, in their group, to actually, you know, address this problem based on the perspective that they've chosen and all the research that they've done. So students, yeah, I've done this in a number of different courses now. So I thought, yeah, I can do this in green criminology as well. See what students come up with, what sort of this, gives them the opportunity to take social issues or environmental issues that they're really passionate about and think about it in an academic way, apply some of the theories or one of the theories that they've learned about in class, the concepts, or, an ego philosophy, to kind of frame it and understand it better, learn about it more, and then share that learning with the rest of the class, but also at the same time engage in some way, whether it's with the community, through social media or other means to kind of spread awareness about it or act on it, basically, in some way. Yeah.
That sounds very cool. So
Yeah.
yeah. So what did you do?
So, the action component of my project was volunteering with Stanley Park Ecology Society as an eco camp assistant, which is a day camp for children.
Well,
And the cause was to address a phenomenon called nature deficit disorder, which is the increasing separatedness of humans and the natural world. Um, and the idea behind that, um, behind wanting to connect children and the natural world, um, is that there's literature to support the idea that the closer people feel to nature, the more connected they feel, the more of an obligation um, they feel to take care of and protect the natural world. So that was kind of the idea behind my project, and that was the work that I did for it.
great. So how did that
Yeah.
how did that go? So you were down volunteering with this It was like a day camp. Like what age kids were you with?
I think the age range was 5 to 12 or 13. And it's a 2 week camp. They run it in the spring and the summer. I volunteered for 1 week and it was every day of the week. But
Wow,
yeah, super fun experience.
that's
Yeah,
like that's a what a great way of giving back. That's amazing.
thank
What
you.
did you learn from that experience of interrelating with with the kids in that setting? Was there anything that stood out to you, or
Yeah, I appreciated it because it kind of like let me relive my childhood and the excitement that I had for being in nature because they really loved being outdoors and playing outdoors. So that was a really like great part of the experience for me.
yeah, yeah, I can see that. I think as adults, it's so easy to get caught up in our heads and be thinking about like all like the issues and stresses and worries of life. But then, yeah, when you're hanging out with kids, it can be a way of just regaining focus on the here and now, right? And just like being present in nature, uh, and playing and exploring. Sounds like,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, it
super
was
cool.
very
Yeah,
therapeutic. Yeah.
nice.
Yeah.
Uh,
As you were talking, I kept thinking of that Mark's favorite word, reciprocity, right?
yes,
That
important.
idea of, yeah, the connection to nature, giving back to nature, understanding, what we take from it, and in return what we also need to give back. So yeah, it was very well reflected in your project. I know you used a little bit more of a philosophical framing for your project. That was really great. And we don't have to delve into it because it is more philosophical, but it was, yeah, a really great contribution. In your work. So it was really
Thank
fantastic.
you. I really appreciated the opportunity to do it too, because I wasn't just behind my desk 24/7. It gave me the opportunity to actually get out there and make a change. So I really enjoyed that.
Um, Paula, I was going to ask you two questions because one, Paula intimated that there was a, a more that you could, if you wanted to, speak more about the philosophy that underpinned the project. So that was one question I wanted to ask. But then the other question was, Paula, were there other examples of student projects that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I mean it varies. There's been so well for this course. Obviously, there weren't that many because it was a very small group. But I do want to maybe kind of touch on that idea of experiential learning because I think for instructors too, and if you're thinking about, I know you have a couple of tentative plans for your class in terms of getting them out, getting them involved in, you know, a planting project.
Yes.
Maybe, and other things, right? So having that sort of experiential learning, within the class and having kind of student guided projects that will, help them connect with community organizations that are doing work that's related to the course content, right? And kind of bringing that into the course content a little bit more. I think that's a good opportunity. Some of the students were, interested in, food crimes. A few others were focused on, um, land defenders and issues regarding pipelines. A few other topics, but it was a very small green criminology course, so I have like far more examples from other classes in terms of what students have done for those sorts of action projects. But it kind of varies depending on what students are interested in doing. Um, Aramis obviously went to the max and volunteered with a group and for that week and you know really immersed herself into the community versus other students sometimes who just prefer to do something like use a social media platform to raise awareness, create videos, things like that, right? So I've had students who have done like online protests and you know creating events for different issues, social issues, and focusing more on the KPU community. But there's, wide range of options. Yeah.
Cool. And Aramis, did you want to talk more about
Yeah.
the
And
philosophy?
with the philosophies, yeah. I think mainly the philosophies involve anthropocentrism and ecocentrism. And it was kind of about recognizing how anthropocentrism can be problematic and can facilitate that environmental exploitation, and also how that worldview can be kind of perpetuated by the divide between humans and the environment.
Mm.
Um, and with ecocentrism, it's more of, I feel like when you're out in nature and you connect with it and feel its benefits, and um, and it just being a safe place for you. That connection makes you realize, adopt more of an ecocentric view that we're interconnected and interrelated with nature, and that we're fundamentally the same. So that was kind of the like philosophy behind that, with the connection and
Yeah.
disconnection between humans and the natural world.
Yeah, yeah, and that's
Yeah,
super interesting. As you're talking, I was thinking about how there's a feedback loop between our actions and our thoughts and perceptions and the world that we create or the worlds that we create. And so, if we're kind of approaching things through that anthropocentric worldview and we see ourselves as sort of separate from nature, then that will inform our actions and the structures that we continue to recreate, which then in turn reinforce that anthropocentric worldview. But if you are able to break out of that and embrace the more ecocentric worldview, then that opens up a whole other way of relating, and changes behaviors, changes thoughts, perceptions, concepts of self identity, and then can in turn inform changes at the more sort of structural level as well. Um,
exactly.
so that's kind of
So
like, yeah,
yeah, it would be cool if there was like a switch that you could turn and everyone
yeah,
just changes the way they see things. But yeah.
yeah. Well, it's a big switch that gets turned over
Yeah,
4 months of green criminology, right, Paula? It's like,
exactly.
Yes, exactly. The more students we have, release
yeah.
them back out. Yeah, exactly.
And so I'll say the one of the ideas that I've had for the summer that Paula alluded to is I was in contact with the sustainability coordinator from the KSA, the Kwantlen Students Association, about the garden beds that are on the Surrey campus, on the Westerman property, just kind of outside one edge of the library. And I asked if we could use one of those garden beds and grow veggies to donate to a local food bank. Uh, so the gardening can be a way to open up a whole range of different issues. And yeah, but the thinking about that word that I can never pronounce, uh, reciprocity, is that it?
You did
Right?
it.
Yay,
Excellent.
reciprocity. Okay.
A plus.
So like
A plus.
so like this, oh, thank you so much. So giving back, right? Like trying to give back.
Yes.
Uh,
Yeah.
um,
That
and
sounds
then
like a really good idea. Sorry.
yeah,
Because I think a collective guided action would be nice, because sometimes I feel like it can be hard when you're kind of left to your own devices to come up with something. So that could be a really cool aspect of the course, I would say.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, thank yeah.
Yeah, some of my first year students actually, when I teach intro to criminology, and I do a small segment on green crim, they do that garbage pickup as their focus, right? Because their focus is always related to pollution and littering and that sort of thing. So they'll kind of use that as their own specific action that they engage in at the end. But yes, definitely scaffolding with these sorts of projects. And I've learned from early iterations of the project that, having like proposals, like in the green criminology class, we did the oral presentations for the proposals. And then so we had students giving other students feedback and suggestions on how they would develop their projects more, and kind of what sources they might have a look at, and kind of what their action might end up looking like. Um, so having that kind of scaffolding and peer evaluation and peer contribution to those action projects is great. So I think some sort of like full class or the majority of the class working on something like that would be really awesome. The garden. If you do want other students, I'm teaching critical crims, so I know a lot of students usually like focusing on food insecurity for their projects. So there might be some recruits for my classes as well.
Feel free to recruit away.
Yeah.
But how are you guys doing? There's this list of questions that we had circulated ahead of time, and I was
Yeah,
just
yeah.
squinting at them to see if there was anything there that uh, we were thinking about talking about that we haven't. But uh, are there things about green criminology that you found frustrating or uh, you know hard to work with, or that you wish would have been otherwise?
Um, I thought about this, and I don't think it's about the substance, but I think the environmental issues that green criminology is concerned with, the frustrating part is that it is tied to our economic system and the goal of profit generation under capitalism. So it's kind of like you feel like you can't really alter that. And that's what so much of it is tied to. That's like the biggest part that's frustrating. I would say. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So there's that sense of disempowerment almost, if you think about like the scale
Yeah.
of the issues. Yeah, yeah, I get
Yeah.
that. I think that's yeah, and I feel like that also resonates with conversations around like climate anxiety and when looking at impacts of climate change and um, the just like the massive amount of momentum that our fossil fuel economy has, uh,
Hmm.
and how difficult it's proving to reduce emissions, even when we know that they're so damaging. Um, yeah, and but I think it's good to think about this, for us as instructors, because it's got to be about um, not just becoming aware of like the scope and the scale of the situation, but also ideally like finding agency, right? To like engage productively with them and in whatever small way is possible. So I think that's one of the things I loved about the action project that you're describing
Hmm.
for
Yeah.
Paula, like just engaging with kids and seeing that, yeah, like there's just this kind of joy and wonder when you're engaging with nature on that in that way.
And
Um,
making the difference that you can. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Within that. Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's tricky to find that balance, right? Of like
Hmm.
trying to make a difference and be feeling positive while also being aware of the immensity of the problem. Um, but we could also say, hey, look, this is humanity's greatest challenge. What an exciting time to be alive. We can do it. Um,
Yeah.
you know, uh, Paula, what are your thoughts?
I actually had, yeah, I'm gonna bring Greg into this. We can bring him in at the end. I had Greg's voice in my head as you were talking about that kind of agency structure dualism, right? Or balance struggle. So I had his voice kind of saying, yeah, like all these small action projects that you're engaging in, they have no significant impact. um Well, no, but in reality, though, that is actually one of the things that we also talked about in the course, right? At the end, talking about, we do have some agency, we do have our, you know, um, so many opportunities to change our own behaviors, but how that ultimately changes how, like the status quo, that doesn't have as much of a significant impact, right? So we're seeing these kind of micro level changes or these micro level actions that we're engaging in that make us feel good, and they do have an impact, so I don't want to diminish that. But in terms of how we see that causing a shift might be a little bit more minimal, right? So I think that is actually a frustration for students coming into the class because they see how big these environmental issues really are, and trying to have an impact can be difficult. And also just I mean, I know for most of the students, it was perhaps not their first time because they'd had courses with me before talking about green criminology. But oftentimes, like other students would say, I don't even know what green criminology is, or I've never heard of this before, right? Because it's perceived to be such a small segment of the broader discipline. And it's just not widely kind of disseminated within other courses, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to incorporate at least some of the foundations in early criminology courses to teach our students a little bit more about that and kind of what this diverse subfield really is. I also really want Greg to be here because I want him to contribute to the. I feel like he'd have so much to say. Yeah.
What do you think, Aramis?
I
Have
just
you ever taken a class with Greg Simmons?
I have corporate crime, white collar and
Okay.
corporate crime.
White
yes.
Good
collar.
class,
Yeah.
great
Shout out
lecture.
for
Yeah,
white collar corporate crime. Yeah.
shout out. Yeah.
Yeah. Another good class. Um, okay. Well, what do you think, guys? Should we call this a wrap?
I think we.
I'll
I
let
think
you
we.
two call the shots on that.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
Okay.
is there everything? We've said everything that we need to say.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
think so.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, great. This has been a wonderful conversation. And if
Yeah.
you're listening to this podcast and you haven't signed up for courses, at, for the summer at KPU yet, register for 3911 Green Criminology.
3911. Yes.
Yeah, we selected that number purposely, right? Emergency.
Yeah.
Um,
Environmental emergency, climate emergency. Yeah.
all right. Bye for now.